The town chose the cowboy for her, but her heart waited at the forge. The first time Eliza Hart entered the blacksmith shop, Caleb Rowan was holding a piece of iron that could have killed him. It had split under the hammer without warning, throwing a sharp red fragment past his cheek. The metal struck the wall behind him and fell into the dirt, still glowing. Caleb did not flinch. He lowered the hammer, turned the damaged piece with his tongs, and studied it as though the iron had merely asked him a difficult question. Only then did he notice the young woman standing in the doorway. The desert wind lifted the edge of her blue traveling coat. Dust clung to the hem of her dress, and one hand held a small leather case tightly against her chest. Behind her, a chestnut mare shifted beside the hitching rail. "You should stand farther back," Caleb said. Eliza looked at the glowing fragment near the wall. "So should you." For the first time that morning, Caleb almost smiled. Red Mesa, Arizona territory, had never treated blacksmiths as men worth watching. The town saved its admiration for riders who returned from cattle drives with silver spurs, bright stories, and enough money to buy whiskey for strangers. Caleb had no silver spurs. He had heavy boots worn pale at the toes, 3 shirts fit for public view, and a dark burn along his left wrist from an accident when he was 14. At 26, his shoulders had been shaped by years at the anvil, but he carried himself quietly as though strength was another tool that should be used rather than displayed. Most people in Red Mesa knew the sound of his hammer better than they knew his voice. They brought him bent wagon rims, broken hinges, cracked plows, loose horseshoes, and promises to pay him after the harvest. Caleb repaired what they carried in and rarely reminded them of what they owed. The town called him dependable. It was the kind of praise given to a roof that did not leak. Eliza Hart had arrived that morning to take charge of the small schoolhouse near the church. She had come from St. Louis with 2 trunks, 12 books, and a letter from her uncle, who had died before she reached Arizona. The letter had contained only 4 lines. "Go to Red Mesa. Ask about the Bellweather Mine. Trust the man who repairs what others abandon." She had read those lines so many times that the paper had softened beneath her fingers. Now she stood inside the hottest building in town, facing a soot-covered stranger who did not look eager to be trusted by anyone. "I was told you repair delicate things," she said. Caleb glanced at the leather case in her arms. "I repair iron. This has iron inside it. That does not make it an iron thing." Eliza stepped closer and placed the case on his workbench. She opened the brass clasp. Inside lay a small music box wrapped in faded white cloth. Its wooden sides were scratched, and one corner had been darkened by fire. A tiny painted bird rested beneath the cracked glass lid. Caleb wiped his hands on a rag before touching it. The care in that small gesture surprised her. He turned the key once. Nothing happened. "It belonged to my mother," Eliza said. "She died when I was young." Caleb removed the cracked lid and examined the mechanism. "Someone tried to force it." "My uncle. He was not patient." "No." Caleb lifted one of the small gears with the tip of a narrow tool. His face changed. The shift was slight, but Eliza saw it. His eyes rested on a mark carved beneath the mechanism, where no one would have noticed it without taking the box apart. It was a small symbol shaped like a bell inside a circle. Eliza leaned forward. "You know that mark." Caleb placed the gear back carefully. "I have seen it." "Where?" He closed the lid. "In places where questions usually bring trouble." Outside, a horse approached at a fast, confident pace. A moment later, a rider stopped beside the forge. The man who dismounted was everything Red Mesa admired. Silas Boone was tall, clean-shaven, and dressed in a tan coat that had never been patched. His polished boots carried only enough dust to suggest adventure without revealing hardship. He owned part of the Double Star Ranch and had twice driven cattle through country where other men refused to ride. When Silas smiled, people felt chosen. He removed his hat as he entered. "Miss Hart," he said warmly, The whole town has been wondering where our new schoolteacher disappeared to. Eliza straightened. I did not disappear. I walked across the street. Silas laughed as though she had entertained him. Then he looked at Caleb. The warmth did not leave his face, but something in it cooled. Rowan. Boone. Silas placed a broken spur on the workbench. Can you have that ready by Saturday? Monday. I need it Saturday. Then you should have broken it on Tuesday. Eliza lowered her eyes, so neither man would see her smile. Silas noticed anyway. He turned toward her and offered his arm. Mrs. Talbot is preparing a welcome supper at the boarding house. I promised I would bring you. I did not know I had agreed. You have not yet. His answer was easy and pleasant. He was accustomed to doors opening before he touched them. Eliza glanced toward the music box. Caleb had already turned away. He was selecting a tool from the wall, giving her the privacy of pretending he was not listening. How long will the repair take? She asked him. A week, perhaps 2. And the mark? Caleb's hand stopped beside the tools. Silas looked between them. What mark? Caleb picked up a file. Nothing worth discussing. Eliza studied the stillness in his back. She knew silence used as protection. Her uncle had carried the same kind during the last months of his life. She closed the leather case, leaving the music box on Caleb's bench. I will return tomorrow. Caleb finally looked at her. There is no reason to. I believe there is. Silas offered his arm again. This time Eliza accepted, though her attention remained on the blacksmith. As they stepped into the sunlight, the church bell rang noon across Red Mesa. Shopkeepers came to their doors. 2 ranch hands called Silas by name. Mrs. Talbot waved from the boarding house porch, already smiling at the sight of the admired cowboy beside the new schoolteacher. Everyone saw them. No one noticed Caleb, standing in the shadow of the forge doorway. He watched Eliza cross the street until the crowd gathered around her. Then he returned to the music box and removed the mechanism once more. Beneath the bell-shaped mark were 3 letters Eliza had not seen. CRR. Caleb Rowan's hand began to tremble. Those letters had belonged to his father. And his father had died 16 years earlier beneath the ruins of the Bellweather Mine. Caleb did not touch the music box again until the forge had gone quiet. All afternoon, the bell-shaped mark remained in his thoughts. He shod 2 horses, repaired a cracked stove door, and straightened the bent axle of a freight wagon. He answered questions when people asked them. He took coins when they were offered. He nodded when old Mrs. Gable promised to pay him after her hens began laying again. But each time the hammer struck iron, he saw the same 3 letters. CRR. His father had been Charles Reed Rowan. No one in Red Mesa spoke that name anymore. By sunset, the last customer had gone. The street outside faded from gold to brown, and the wind pushed a loose tumbleweed against the side of the livery stable. Caleb shut the forge doors, lit a lantern, and carried the music box to the small room behind his shop. The room held a narrow bed, a wash basin, and a wooden table his father had built before Caleb was born. One leg was shorter than the others. Caleb had fixed nearly everything in Red Mesa, but he had never repaired that table. He sat down and turned the music box over in his hands. He remembered his father's hands better than his face. Large hands, scarred knuckles, a missing nail on the smallest finger, hands that could shape hot steel and still lift a sleeping child without waking him. Charles Rowan had not been a miner. That was the first thing that troubled Caleb. He had been a blacksmith, just like his son. Yet 16 years ago, he had gone to the Bellweather Mine during a storm and never returned. The official story said a tunnel had collapsed while he was repairing a support bracket. 11 men had died. Their bodies had never been recovered. Caleb had been 10 years old. For years, he had believed the mine had simply taken his father. Now the music box suggested his father had once held something small and delicate, something connected to a woman in St. Louis, and a dead uncle who had sent his niece across the country with a warning. Caleb reached for a fine screwdriver. The mechanism came apart slowly. Beneath the largest gear, he found a thin metal plate no wider than his thumb. It had been fitted so carefully that even a trained eye might miss it. He lifted it with the point of a needle. There was writing underneath. Not words. Numbers. 714-3. Caleb stared at them. Then came a knock at the forge door. He covered the music box with the faded cloth and slipped the metal plate into his shirt pocket. The knock came again. Mr. Rowan. Eliza. Caleb opened the door halfway. She stood beneath the lantern outside, holding a covered plate in both hands. The evening wind had loosened strands of dark hair from the pins at the back of her head. "I brought supper," she said. "I did not ask for supper. No, Mrs. Talbot asked me to bring it." He looked toward the boarding house across the street. Its windows glowed warmly. "Mrs. Talbot has never brought me supper. She said you forget to eat. She has watched me forget for 12 years. Eliza lifted the plate. Perhaps she has recently become concerned. Caleb knew Mrs. Talbot well enough to understand what had happened. The older woman had seen Eliza leave the dining room early and had handed her a plate with the kind of smile that meant the arrangement had been deliberate. He opened the door. The forge had cooled, but warmth still rose from the bricks. Eliza placed the food on the workbench: beef, potatoes, and a thick slice of bread wrapped in cloth. Her eyes moved toward the back room. "You found something." It was not a question. Caleb leaned against the bench. "You look for secrets everywhere. Only where men turn pale and pretend they have not." "I did not turn pale." "You did." He said nothing. Outside, the chestnut mare stamped one hoof against the packed dirt. Eliza's gaze fell on the covered music box. "My uncle's name was Gideon Hart," she said. "He worked as an accountant for the Bellweather Mining Company." Caleb's eyes sharpened. "Went 17 years ago. A year before the collapse." Eliza folded her hands to stop them from trembling. "He left Arizona soon after the mine closed. He never told my family why. He settled in Missouri, lived alone, and refused to speak about Red Mesa. Then last spring he became ill." "Why did he send you here?" "I do not know." "That is not true." Her expression tightened. Caleb regretted the words, but he did not take them back. Eliza looked toward the dying forge fire. "Before he passed, he woke one night believing someone was in the house. He made me promise I would leave St. Louis if anything happened to him." "Did something happen?" 3 days after his funeral, someone searched his room. Caleb stood straighter. "What did they take?" "Nothing that I could see." "Then they were looking for something they did not find." Her eyes moved to the covered music box. Caleb understood. "So you brought it here?" "I found it hidden beneath a floorboard. My mother's name was carved on the bottom. I thought it belonged to her." "Did it?" "I am no longer certain." For a moment, only the soft hiss of cooling coal filled the shop. Caleb wanted to tell her about the initials. He wanted to place the small metal plate in her hand and ask what the numbers meant. Instead, he remembered his father leaving the house during a storm. He remembered his mother standing in the doorway until dawn. Secrets had already taken one person from him. He would not let them take another. "You should go back to St. Louis," he said. Eliza's face became still. "You sound like my uncle." "Then he may have been right. I crossed half the country because he told me to come here. And now I am telling you to leave. You do not have that right." "No." Caleb looked at the music box. "But I know what Bellweather does to people who ask questions." Eliza stepped closer. "And I know what fear does to people who stop asking them." The words struck harder than she intended. Caleb's jaw tightened. She softened her voice. I am not asking you to protect me. That is fortunate. I am asking you to tell me what you found. Before Caleb could answer, a shadow moved beneath the forge door. Both of them heard it. A boot scraped against the dirt outside. Caleb reached for the iron bar beside the workbench and pulled the door open. The street was empty. The boarding house lamps flickered across the road. Farther down, laughter spilled from the saloon. A horse turned the corner near the sheriff's office, but no rider sat in the saddle. Eliza came to the doorway. Something lay on the ground near her boot. A folded piece of paper. Caleb picked it up. Inside, written in dark ink, were 7 words. The mine kept one grave open for Rowan. Eliza read it over his shoulder. Then Caleb saw the mark at the bottom of the note. A small bell inside a circle. Caleb folded the note once, then again, until the warning became a small square in his palm. Eliza watched him push it into his shirt pocket beside the metal plate. "You still intend to tell me nothing?" she asked. "I intend to keep you alive." "That is not an answer. It is the only one that matters tonight." He stepped outside and studied the street. The saloon doors swung open and closed beneath the wind. A wagon stood near the hotel with no driver beside it. Lamps burned behind curtains, turning every window into a possible hiding place. Red Mesa had always seemed simple to Caleb. People worked, argued, borrowed, paid late, and gathered on Sundays to pretend they had done none of those things. But now the familiar street looked different. Too many shadows, too many doors, too many men who might remember what happened at Bellweather and prefer it stayed buried. He turned to Eliza. "You will sleep at the boarding house. Lock the door." "I already lock it." "Put a chair beneath the handle." "Will that stop the sort of man who leaves warnings outside a blacksmith shop?" "No." Her eyes narrowed. "Then perhaps I should stay where there is an iron bar." Caleb looked at her as though she had suggested sleeping inside the furnace. "No. You cannot send me away and call it protection." "I can if you go." "I will not." He rubbed a hand across his face. Soot darkened the edge of his jaw. Eliza saw the weariness beneath his anger then. It was not only fear for her. The note had opened something old in him, something he had spent 16 years trying to seal shut. She lowered her voice. "Tell me about your father." Caleb looked down the street. "He died in the mine." "That is what the town says." "That is what happened." "Do you believe it?" The question settled between them. Caleb's first instinct was to refuse it. His second was worse. He realized he did not know. Before he could speak, hoofbeats sounded from the east end of town. Silas Boone rode into the lamplight, slowed beside the forge, and looked from Caleb to Eliza. His eyes rested on the iron bar in Caleb's hand. "Trouble?" "No," Caleb said. Eliza answered at the same time. "Yes." Silas dismounted. He did not smile now. "What happened?" Caleb held Eliza's gaze, warning her to remain silent. She ignored him. "Someone left a note." Silas looked at Caleb. "What kind of note?" "The kind that does not concern you." "If it concerns Miss Hart, I will decide that for myself." Caleb took one step forward. The movement was small, but the air changed. Eliza moved between them before either man could mistake pride for duty. "The note mentioned Bellweather Mine," she said. Silas went still. Caleb saw it. Not surprise. Recognition. It vanished quickly, replaced by concern. "What exactly did it say?" Silas asked. Caleb's voice became quiet. "You know something." Silas glanced toward the boarding house. Mrs. Talbot's silhouette moved behind a curtain. "This street is not the place." "The forge is." Silas hesitated, then led his horse to the hitching rail. Inside, Caleb closed the doors and lowered the wooden bar across them. Eliza lit a second lantern. Its flame moved in the draft, sending long shadows over the tools. Sela stood near the anvil, hat in hand. "My father owned a small share of Bellweather," he said. Eliza's expression changed. Caleb's did not. "Your father was a rancher," Caleb said. "He invested in the mine before I was born. He lost most of what he put into it. 11 men lost more." Silas accepted the blow without protest. "I know. Do you?" "My mother kept records, letters, payment books, contracts. My father burned nearly all of them after the collapse." Caleb felt the floor shift beneath his certainty. "Why?" "He said the company had become cursed." "Men say cursed when they do not want to say guilty," Eliza said. Silas looked at her. "That may be true." He walked toward the cold forge, keeping his voice low. "When I was 14, I found a ledger page beneath a loose board in our old house. It listed payments made during the week before the collapse. One name appeared 3 times. "Who's?" Caleb asked. "Gideon Hart." Eliza gripped the edge of the workbench. "My uncle." Silas nodded. There was another name beside his. Caleb already knew. "Charles Rowan." Silas turned toward him. "Yes." The room became painfully quiet. Caleb could hear the mare outside pulling at the hitching rope. "What were the payments for?" he asked. "The page did not say, only amounts and a note in my father's hand." Silas paused. It read they found the weak supports, stopped them before inspection. Eliza's face lost color. Caleb stepped closer to Silas. "Where is that page?" "Gone." "You burned it." "No, someone took it from my room the same night I found it." "Who knew you had it?" "My father, our housekeeper, possibly one ranch hand." "And you said nothing for 12 years. Silas's mouth tightened. "I was 14. My father told me that if I repeated what I had seen, more families would lose their homes. He said the mine collapse was an accident and the page would only create anger." "So you believed him?" "No," Silas said. "I obeyed him." Caleb turned away. The distinction did not make the silence less bitter. Eliza reached beneath the cloth and opened the music box. She pointed to the mark carved under the mechanism. Silas leaned close. The moment he saw it, his face changed again. Caleb caught his arm. "You know that symbol?" Silas looked at the bell inside the circle. "It belonged to a private company called Bellweather Recovery." "I have never heard of it," Eliza said. "Almost no one has." "What did they recover?" Caleb asked. Silas met his eyes. "Not ore." A hard knock struck the forge door. All 3 of them froze. Then Mrs. Talbot called from outside. "Caleb, open this door. The schoolhouse is burning." Eliza ran first. They reached the street in time to see orange light rising behind the church. Townspeople rushed with buckets. A window burst outward beneath the heat. Eliza stopped in the road, one hand covering her mouth. Caleb looked at the flames, then at the music box still in her hands. The fire had not started to destroy a school. It had started to destroy whatever someone believed Eliza had hidden there. If this moment has you wondering who can still be trusted in Red Mesa, stay with the story, because the fire is only the beginning. Then Eliza saw a figure moving behind the burning schoolhouse. A man in a dark coat was running toward the old mine road. And tied to his saddle was Eliza's missing leather trunk. Caleb was already moving before Eliza spoke. He crossed the road, caught the reins of Silas's horse, and swung into the saddle. "Stay here," he told her. "No." "Eliza, that is my trunk. And that man wants you to follow him." She looked toward the old mine road, where the rider had disappeared into darkness. "Then he has succeeded." Caleb's hand tightened on the reins. For one hard second, neither moved. Behind them, townspeople formed a line from the well to the schoolhouse. Buckets passed from hand to hand. Smoke rolled above the church roof, carrying sparks into the night. Silas grabbed the bridle of a second horse tied outside the boarding house. "She rides with me," he said. Caleb turned sharply. "She stays." "You cannot watch the road and watch her at the same time." Eliza climbed onto the horse before either man finished arguing. "I am not a sack of flour," she said. "Ride." They left Red Mesa, beneath a sky made red by the schoolhouse fire. The old mine road ran north through dry creek beds and low ridges. Moonlight silvered the desert brush, but the rider ahead had no lantern. Only the faint beat of hooves marked his path. Caleb rode first. He knew the road better than Silas. As a boy, he had followed it many times with his father, sitting in front of him on the saddle while Charles Rowan carried tools to Bellweather. Those memories returned without mercy. His father's arm around his waist. The smell of leather and coal. A low voice telling him never to trust a timber support by its painted surface. Caleb had not traveled this road since the mine closed. Now every bend seemed to remember him. They reached a fork where one trail led to the abandoned mine, and the other dropped into a narrow wash. Caleb dismounted. "What are you doing?" Silas asked. "Looking." He knelt beside the trail. The dirt was pale and dry except for one darker patch where water had gathered after the week's brief rain. A hoofprint marked the edge. Caleb touched it. Left hind shoe is missing a corner. Eliza leaned down from the saddle. "You can tell that from one mark. I made half the shoes in this town." He followed the prints into the wash. The trail narrowed between stone walls. The air became colder there, and the sound of the town vanished behind them. Eliza held her coat closed with one hand. "Why would anyone steal a trunk and ride toward a dead mine?" "To make us think the trunk matters," Caleb said. "You do not believe it does." "I believe anything carried where it can be seen is meant to be seen." Silas glanced at him. "And what is hidden?" Caleb thought of the small metal plate in his pocket. "That is usually the reason." A lantern appeared ahead. "Not moving. Waiting." Caleb raised one hand and they stopped. The lantern stood on a flat rock in the middle of the wash. Eliza's trunk sat beside it, lid open. No man. No horse. The clothes inside had been thrown across the ground. Her books lay in the dust. A framed photograph had been broken beneath a boot. Eliza dismounted slowly. "My mother." She picked up the photograph. Cracked glass crossed the woman's face. Caleb saw her thumb brush the broken edge. A small line of blood appeared, but she did not notice. He took the frame from her. "Do not touch anything else." "Why?" He pointed to the trunk. A length of thin wire ran from the lower hinge into the darkness behind the rock. Silas moved back at once. Caleb followed the wire with his eyes. It was tied to a stack of stones balanced above the narrow trail. If Eliza had lifted the trunk or moved it carelessly, the stones would have fallen. Not enough to bury them. Enough to injure a horse. Enough to start panic in a confined space. "It is a warning," Silas said. "No," Caleb replied. He examined the knot. "It is a test." "For what?" Eliza asked. "To see whether we rush." A sound came from above. Stone scraping against stone. Caleb looked up. A dark shape moved along the ridge. Silas drew his revolver. The figure vanished before he could aim. Then a voice called down from the rocks. Charles Rowan should have left well enough alone. Caleb stepped into the open. "Show yourself." The answer came from farther away now. So should his son. A horse galloped along the ridge, heading toward Bellweather. Caleb cut the wire with his knife and pulled the trunk free. Inside, everything had been searched. One item was missing. The white cloth that had wrapped the music box. Eliza looked at the empty space. "They know I brought it to you." "They knew before tonight," Caleb said. Eliza picked up one of her books and brushed dust from the cover. Then the fire was not meant to find the box. Caleb looked back toward Red Mesa. The glow above the town had begun to fade. It was meant to empty the street. Eliza understood first. To draw us away. Caleb was already mounting. They rode back hard. By the time they reached town, the schoolhouse fire had been brought under control. Half the roof was gone, and the front room had been ruined, but the building still stood. Mrs. Talbot ran toward them. Caleb, thank heaven. What happened? Her face was pale beneath the soot. Someone broke into your forge. Caleb dismounted before the horse stopped moving. The forge door hung open. The wooden bar had been split. Tools lay scattered across the floor, drawers pulled out, boxes overturned. He rushed to the back room. The table was upside down. The mattress had been cut open. The music box remained on the workbench. Untouched. Eliza came to stand beside him. Why leave it? Caleb lifted the lid. The gears were still there. The mark was still there. But beneath the mechanism, where the hidden plate had been, someone had carved a fresh sentence into the wood. Ask Eliza what his father buried under the chapel. Caleb turned. Eliza stood in the doorway, staring at the words. For the first time since Eliza had met him, the admired cowboy looked afraid. My father did not bury anything under the chapel, he said. Then his eyes lowered. At least that is what he made me promise to tell. The chapel stood at the western edge of Red Mesa, where the town's last row of buildings gave way to open desert. By the time Caleb, Eliza, and Eliza reached it, the fire behind them had faded to a dull orange glow. Smoke still hung over the rooftops, and the church bell rope moved gently in the wind though no one had touched it. Eliza stopped at the chapel steps. For several seconds, he said nothing. Caleb watched him closely. You knew there was something beneath it. Eliza looked toward the dark windows. I knew my father came here the night before he died. Eliza turned to him. You said nothing about his death. He fell from a horse 6 years ago. Did he? Eliza's expression hardened, but not with anger. With my father, I learned not to be certain of anything. They entered through the side door. The chapel was small, built from pale timber darkened by age. Moonlight fell through the narrow windows, touching the rows of empty benches. A plain wooden cross hung above the pulpit. Eliza lit a lantern. The flame revealed dust in the air and tracks on the floor. Fresh tracks. Caleb crouched beside them. Someone came through here tonight. Eliza glanced toward the altar. My father always sat in the third row. They moved to the bench he indicated. Nothing about it seemed unusual. The wood was worn smooth by years of hands and Sunday coats. Caleb ran his fingers beneath the seat and along the floorboards. One nail was newer than the rest. He took a small tool from his pocket and lifted it. The board rose with a low groan. Beneath it was a shallow space lined with oilcloth. Inside lay a rusted tin box. Eliza stared at it. I never knew. Caleb looked at him. You knew enough to promise you would deny it. My father woke me the night he hid something here. He said men had already died because of Bellweather. He made me swear that if anyone asked about the chapel, I would say there was nothing beneath it. Did he tell you why? Eliza shook his head. He told me fear was sometimes the only fence strong enough to protect a family. Caleb lifted the box. Fear also keeps cattle from finding water. The lock had nearly rusted through. He broke it with the edge of his tool. Inside were 3 ledgers, a bundle of letters tied with black thread, and a small cloth pouch. Eliza opened the first ledger. The pages listed shipments from Bellweather Mine, but not only silver ore. There were entries for blasting powder, imported machinery, and timber supports marked as new. Besides several shipments, someone had written one word. Rejected. Caleb examined the dates. These were delivered months before the collapse. Silas leaned over his shoulder. My father's company supplied timber. Caleb turned a page. The same shipment number appeared again 3 weeks later, now marked as approved. The price had been doubled. Eliza's voice was quiet. They sold damaged supports to the mine, rejected them, then brought them back under a different record. Silas went pale. My father signed this. Caleb found the signature. August Boone. He looked at Silas, but there was no satisfaction in exposing the truth, only the bitter weight of another father's choices. Eliza opened one of the letters. The writing was hurried. August. The West supports will not hold through another rain. Charles Rowan inspected the brackets and refuses to certify them. Gideon Hart has copied the accounts. Both men intend to speak to the territorial inspector when he arrives Friday. You must delay them. There was no signature. Caleb read the letter twice. His father had not gone to Bellweather merely to repair a bracket. He had gone because he knew the mine was dangerous. Eliza pressed one hand against the page. My uncle copied the accounts. And someone stopped the inspection, Caleb said. Silas sat heavily on the nearest bench. My father helped them. The words came out as a confession, though the crime was not his. Eliza untied the cloth pouch. A small silver key fell into her palm. With it came a piece of paper bearing a rough drawing of the mine. One tunnel had been marked in red. Tunnel 7. Beneath the map were the same numbers Caleb had found under the music box mechanism. 714-3. He removed the metal plate from his pocket and placed it beside the map. They match. Silas looked closer. Tunnel 7, 14 paces, third wall brace. Eliza's eyes lifted. There is something hidden inside the mine. A floorboard creaked behind them. Caleb turned. A man stood near the chapel door. Sheriff Amos Vale had served Red Mesa for nearly 20 years. He was broad in the waist, gray at the temples, and known for ending trouble with a calm voice before it became violence. Tonight he held a revolver. Not pointed at them. Not yet. You should close that box, he said. Silas rose. Sheriff. Vale stepped into the lantern light. You three have caused enough damage for one night. The schoolhouse was burned, Eliza said. Our things were searched. And now you are breaking into a chapel. Caleb stood between the sheriff and the open floor. You knew about Bellweather. Vale's eyes moved to the ledger in Eliza's hands. I knew men made mistakes. 11 men died. 12, Vale said. Caleb went still. The sheriff seemed to realize too late what he had revealed. Only 11 names are on the town memorial, Eliza said. Vale lowered his revolver slightly. The 12th man was not a miner. Caleb's throat tightened. My father. No. The sheriff looked directly at him. Charles Rowan did not die in the collapse. The chapel seemed to lose all sound. Caleb could hear only his own breathing. Vale continued. I saw him alive 2 days after the mine was sealed. Silas stared at the sheriff. Where? On the North Road, riding with Gideon Hart. Eliza clutched the letter. My uncle told everyone he had left Arizona alone. He lied. Caleb stepped forward. Where did they go? Vale's face carried the tired sorrow of a man who had protected a secret so long that it had become part of him. I do not know, but someone did. He looked toward the tin box. Someone who has spent 16 years making sure neither man returned. A shot cracked outside. The chapel window shattered. The lantern fell from Eliza's hand. Darkness rushed over them as the flame died on the floor. Caleb reached for her and pulled her behind a bench. Another shot struck the wall. Then a voice called from the desert. Bring out the ledgers, and no one else has to lose a father. Caleb held Eliza close enough to feel her trembling. Across the darkness, Silas whispered the question none of them were ready to answer. What if Charles Rowan is still alive? If you believe the truth can survive even after years of silence, stay with this story, because what waits in Tunnel 7 will change every life in Red Mesa. The third shot did not come. For several seconds, no one inside the chapel moved. Caleb kept one arm across Eliza's shoulders, holding her low behind the bench. Her breath touched the sleeve of his shirt. Across the aisle, Silas crouched near the open floorboard while Sheriff Vale pressed himself against the wall beneath the broken window. Dust drifted through the moonlight. Outside, a horse snorted. Then came the slow scrape of a boot across the chapel porch. Caleb leaned close to Eliza. When I move, stay behind the benches. She looked at him in the darkness. I have heard that order twice tonight. And ignored it twice. I may be learning. He almost answered, but the door handle began to turn. Vale lifted his revolver. The chapel door opened a few inches. A shadow appeared. Caleb grabbed the loose floorboard and hurled it toward the doorway. The stranger fired at the sound. The shot struck the pulpit. Vale fired once in return, not at the man but at the lantern hanging outside. Glass shattered and the porch fell dark. Caleb ran. He crossed the chapel in 3 strides and drove his shoulder into the door. The stranger stumbled backward. A revolver fell into the dirt. For an instant, Caleb saw a narrow face beneath a black hat and a pale scar running from the man's ear to his jaw. Then the stranger struck him with the back of his hand. Caleb fell against the railing. The man turned for his horse. Silas came through the doorway and seized the saddle before he could mount. The horse reared, throwing both men aside. The stranger rolled to his feet, pulled a knife, and slashed toward Silas. Caleb caught his wrist. They struggled in the dirt, boots sliding over dry ground. Caleb smelled sweat, horse leather, and the bitter smoke drifting from town. The scarred man looked into his face and smiled. You have your father's hands. Caleb's grip tightened. You knew him. The man drove a knee into Caleb's side and broke free. He ran toward the desert brush. Vale raised his revolver. Stop. The man did not. Vale fired into the ground ahead of him. Sand jumped near his boots, but he kept running. Silas caught the stranger's abandoned horse and mounted. I'll bring him back. No, Caleb said. Silas looked down at him. He knows where Charles is. Or he wants us to believe that. Silas hesitated. In the distance, another horse called from beyond the ridge. The scarred man had not come alone. A second rider emerged from the darkness, bent low in the saddle. The stranger caught the man's hand and swung up behind him. Together they disappeared into the open country. Silas started after them. Eliza stepped into his path. Caleb is right. Silas pulled the reins hard. You heard him, he knew Charles. He also knew exactly what would make us follow. The rider vanished beyond the ridge. Silas looked toward the empty trail, anger moving across his face. Then he dismounted. Caleb pressed one hand against his side. Eliza came to him at once. Are you hurt? No. You are holding your ribs. That is not the same thing. She reached toward him, but he stepped back. The movement was small. It hurt her more than he intended. Caleb saw it and regretted it, yet he could not bring himself closer, not while the stranger's words still burned inside him. You have your father's hands. The sheriff retrieved the fallen revolver and checked its chamber. No maker's mark, Vale said. Serial number filed away. Silas looked toward him. Who was he? Vale shook his head. I have never seen him. Caleb did not believe him. The sheriff noticed. I have lied to you about enough, Vale said quietly. I will not lie about that. Eliza returned to the chapel and lifted the tin box from beneath the floor. The ledgers are still here. So is the map, Silas said. Caleb looked at Tunnel 7, marked in red. The attack had failed too easily. The stranger could have waited until they left the chapel. He could have fired from the ridge. Instead, he had called out, shot through windows, and tried to draw them into the open. It was loud, desperate, almost careless. Caleb examined the tin box. One bundle of letters was missing. He remembered seeing 3 when they opened it. Now there were 2. He got what he came for. Eliza stared inside. Went. During the darkness. Vale's mouth tightened. The gunshots were a distraction. Silas looked at the open doorway. Which letters did he take? Eliza counted the bundles. The ones tied with red thread. Caleb remembered the top page. A name had been written across it in Gideon Hart's hand. Elinert. My mother, Eliza whispered. They searched the chapel floor, the benches, and the ground outside, but the letters were gone. By the time they returned to town, dawn had begun to thin the eastern sky. The schoolhouse stood blackened and wet. Half the town had gathered around it. Mrs. Talbot handed out coffee from a large tin pot while men carried ruined desks onto the road. Eliza stopped beside the doorway. Her classroom smelled of smoke and soaked wood. The alphabet cards had curled from the heat. The map on the wall had burned through the center. 3 shelves of books lay beneath part of the fallen ceiling. A small slate rested in the mud. Eliza lifted it. A child had written one sentence in careful chalk. Miss Hart says every question deserves an answer. Her hand began to shake. Caleb saw it. This time when he reached for her, she did not turn away. He closed his fingers gently around her wrist, careful of the small cut on her thumb. The children will have another school, he said. With what building? I will find one. With what desks? I will make them. With what time? He looked at the ruined room. I have nights. Eliza looked at him then. Soot covered his collar. One side of his face was bruised, and his knuckles were bleeding where the stranger's knife had scraped them. He had spent the whole night running toward danger and still spoke as though building a school were simply another repair waiting on his bench. You cannot mend everything, Caleb. No. His eyes moved to the slate in her hand. But I can start with this. Mrs. Talbot approached with 2 cups of coffee. Sheriff, she called over her shoulder, there is something you ought to see. Vale stood near the boarding house, reading a telegram that had arrived on the morning stage. His face had gone gray. Caleb, Eliza, and Silas joined him. Who sent it? Caleb asked. Vale handed him the paper. The message had come from a railway station in New Mexico territory. It was addressed to Sheriff Amos Vale. Only one sentence had been written. Gideon Hart is alive, but he will speak only to Eliza Rowan. Eliza read the name twice. Eliza Rowan. Caleb looked at her. Neither of them spoke. Silas took the telegram and checked the station stamp. This was sent yesterday morning. Before she arrived at the chapel, Vale said. Before the fire, Caleb added. Eliza's fingers tightened around the slate. My uncle knew I was coming here. No, Caleb said. He looked toward the road leading south, where the stage had disappeared in the dust. He knew more than that. On the back of the telegram, in faint pencil, someone had written another line. Ask Caleb why his mother changed your name. For the first time since Eliza arrived in Red Mesa, Caleb looked at her as though she were part of a memory he had tried to forget. The morning wind moved smoke through the ruined schoolhouse. Children's papers, burned at the edges, clung to the mud near the steps. Somewhere behind them, a hammer struck wood as townsmen began covering the broken windows. Eliza still held the telegram. Why would my uncle call me Eliza Rowan? Caleb did not answer. Sheriff Vale watched him carefully. Silas lowered his voice. Caleb, I heard her. Then speak. Caleb looked toward the forge across the road. Its doors remained open from the break-in, one hinge twisted loose. For years, that building had been the one place where broken things made sense. A crack could be seen. A weak joint could be tested. Heat could change what force alone could not. But there was no tool for the question in Eliza's eyes. "My mother knew a woman named Eliza Hart," Caleb said at last. Eliza's breath caught. "You knew my mother's?" "No, I knew her name." "From where?" Caleb rubbed his thumb over the cut on his knuckle. "My mother kept a photograph in a Bible. Two women stood outside a house near Bellweather. One was my mother, the other had your eyes." Eliza stared at him. "Why have you never mentioned this?" "Because the photograph disappeared after my mother died." "When?" "8 years ago." Sheriff Vale stepped closer. "Anna Rowan died of fever." "That is what the town was told," Caleb said. Vale's face tightened. "You believe otherwise?" Caleb looked at him. "I was 17. She had been sick for 3 days, but she was getting better. The night she died, someone came to the house." "Who?" Eliza asked. "I never saw his face." The memory returned in pieces. Rain against the roof. A lantern burning low. His mother's voice behind the bedroom door, weak but angry. A man speaking quietly enough that Caleb could not understand the words. Then silence. By morning, Anna Rowan was dead. The Bible was gone, and Sheriff Vale had told Caleb not to trouble himself with questions grief would never answer. Vale looked away first. "You knew someone had visited her," Caleb said. "I knew a horse had been tied behind the house." "And you did nothing." "I found no sign of violence." "You found what you wished to find." The sheriff accepted that without defense. Eliza touched Caleb's sleeve. "What did your mother tell you about Eliza?" "Almost nothing, only that she had once been the bravest woman in Red Mesa." "My mother never lived here." Caleb's eyes met hers. "Perhaps she did." The words seemed to make the morning colder. Mrs. Talbot approached from the boarding house carrying a wool shawl. She placed it around Eliza's shoulders without asking. "You all look as though the dead have started writing letters," she said. No one replied. Her sharp eyes fell on the telegram. "What is it?" Vale folded the paper. "Nothing that concerns the town." Mrs. Talbot held out her hand. "I have fed this town for 22 years. Everything concerns me." Eliza gave her the telegram. The older woman read it, and the color left her face. Caleb saw it. "You know the name." Mrs. Talbot folded the telegram slowly. "I knew Eliza Hart." Eliza stepped toward her. "You said you had never heard of my family." "I lied." The admission came plainly. Mrs. Talbot looked toward the people repairing the schoolhouse. Then she led them into the boarding house kitchen and closed the door. The room smelled of coffee, wet wool, and bread left too long in the oven. A lantern moved in the breeze from the chimney, casting light over rows of tin cups. Mrs. Talbot remained standing. "Eliza came to Red Mesa 17 years ago," she said. "She was not married then. She worked as a nurse at the Bellweather camp." Eliza gripped the back of a chair. "My mother was a seamstress in Missouri. She became one later." "Why would she hide this?" "Because Bellweather did not let people leave with clean hands." Silas leaned against the wall. "What did she do at the mine?" "She cared for injured workers. She also kept notes. Names, wounds, accidents that were never entered into company records." Caleb thought of the rejected supports. She knew the mine was failing. She knew more than that. Mrs. Talbot looked at Eliza. "Your mother and Anna Rowan were close. So were Charles and Gideon. The 4 of them believed they could prove the company had been using damaged timber and false inspection records." "Then why did my mother leave?" Eliza asked. "Because she was carrying a child." The kitchen became silent. Eliza's hand moved to the small silver locket at her throat. My father died before I was born. Mrs. Talbot's eyes filled with sorrow. That is what Alina told you. Eliza looked from her to Caleb. No one spoke. The truth began to form before anyone gave it words. She shook her head. No. Caleb's face hardened with confusion. Mrs. Talbot reached for Eliza's hand. Your mother was not married to Gideon Hart's brother, as you were told. Then who was my father? Mrs. Talbot looked at Caleb. Charles Rowan. Caleb stepped back as though struck. Eliza did not move at all. Outside, a horse shifted near the porch. The leather tack creaked in the quiet. Silas whispered, that would make them. Half-brother and half-sister, Vale said. The words landed with terrible force. Eliza let go of the chair. Caleb's face turned pale beneath the soot. Every glance at the forge, every quiet moment, every pull he had felt toward her now seemed poisoned by a secret buried before either of them could speak. Mrs. Talbot quickly raised one hand. No, listen to me before you believe that. Caleb stared at her. You just said Charles was her father. I said Alina named him as the father. That is not the same thing, Eliza asked, her voice breaking. No. Mrs. Talbot opened a cupboard and removed a small wooden box hidden behind sacks of flour. I kept this because Anna made me swear I would give it to the two of you only if Gideon returned. Inside lay a sealed envelope. Across the front in faded ink were two names. For Caleb Rowan and Eliza Hart. Caleb broke the seal with trembling fingers. The letter inside had been written by Anna Rowan. He read the first line silently, then stopped. Eliza took the page from him. My dear Caleb and dear Eliza, if you are reading this together, then the lie has lasted longer than we feared. Charles Rowan was not Eliza's father. He agreed to claim that name to protect the man who was. Eliza looked up. Who was he protecting? A heavy crash sounded from the dining room. The kitchen door flew open. A young stable boy stumbled inside, breathing hard. Mr. Rowan, he said, someone took your black horse. Caleb folded the letter. Who? The boy shook his head. I did not see his face, but he left this on the saddle post. He held out a strip of red thread, the same kind that had bound the stolen letters. Then a bell rang from somewhere beyond town. Not the church bell. A deep iron sound carried from the north, rolling over the desert in slow, hollow waves. Caleb knew that sound. Bellweather Mine had once used an iron bell to warn workers of a tunnel collapse. It had not rung in 16 years. Mrs. Talbot looked toward the window. They are calling you to Tunnel 7. Caleb picked up his coat. Eliza blocked the door. You are not going without me. After what we just learned. We learned nothing. We found another lie. Her eyes were wet, but her voice held. My uncle is alive. Your father may be alive. My mother hid the truth. Your mother left us a letter. Whoever is in that mine knows the rest. Caleb looked at her for a long moment. The feeling between them had not disappeared. That was what frightened him most. Silas reached for his hat. I am coming too. Sheriff Vale checked his revolver. So am I. Mrs. Talbot took the unfinished letter from Eliza's hand and looked at the final line hidden beneath the fold. Her expression changed. Wait. But they were already moving toward the door. She read the last sentence aloud. The true father of Eliza Hart was the only man who escaped Tunnel 7 alive. Caleb stopped. The mine bell rang again. This time, beneath its echo, they heard a distant cry from the northern road. A man's voice. Old, weak, and carrying one name across the desert. Eliza. The mine bell rang a third time as they rode north. Its sound rolled across the desert like a warning from beneath the earth. Caleb rode Silas's spare horse because his own had been taken. Eliza rode beside him, her face pale beneath the moonlight. Silas followed with Sheriff Vale, while Mrs. Talbot remained in town with Anna Rowan's unfinished letter hidden inside her coat. No one spoke for the first mile. The old Bellweather road climbed between black ridges, where the wind carried the smell of stone and dry brush. Far ahead, the abandoned mine buildings stood against the sky like broken teeth. Eliza kept hearing the cry from the road. Her name. It had sounded weak but real. "Do you think it was Gideon?" she asked. Caleb looked toward the mine. "I do not know. You always say that when you are afraid of the answer." He turned to her. The truth in her words held no anger this time, only exhaustion. Caleb lowered his voice. "The letter changed nothing until we know who your father was." "It changed something." "What?" "You looked at me as though I had become dangerous to you." He looked ahead again. "That is not what I meant." "It is what you did." Caleb pulled the reins and stopped. The others slowed behind them. Eliza stopped too. The wind moved between the horses. "I am afraid," Caleb said, "not of you." "Then of what?" "That every good thing I have believed since you came here may have been built on another man's lie." Eliza's eyes softened. "So are mine." He looked at her then, truly looked. She was frightened, tired, and still riding toward a dead mine, because the truth mattered more to her than safety. Caleb wanted to reach for her. Instead, he placed both hands on the reins. "Until we know," he said, "I will not pretend it does not matter." "I am not asking you to pretend." Her voice trembled. "I am asking you not to leave me alone inside it." Silas turned his horse away, giving them the smallest piece of privacy the open road allowed. Caleb finally reached across the narrow space and took Eliza's hand. Only for a moment. Only long enough for her to know he was still there. Then the mine bell rang again. They rode on. Bellweather had been abandoned for 16 years, but the main gate stood open. A lantern burned near the ore shed. Someone had swept a clear path through the dust from the gate to the mine entrance. Caleb's stolen black horse was tied beside the old office building, unharmed. No rider. No guard. Sheriff Vale dismounted and examined the ground. 3 horses came through recently. Only 2 left, Caleb said. Silas checked the mine entrance. The bell rope has been repaired. Eliza saw fresh knots near the base. Someone wanted us to hear it. A low cough came from the ore shed. Caleb drew the iron hammer he had carried from the forge. Vale raised his revolver. Silas moved toward the door. Eliza reached it first. Inside, a man sat tied to a chair. His hair was white, his face thin, and one side of his coat was stained with dust. A cloth gag hung loose beneath his chin. Eliza froze. The man lifted his head. "My little bird," he whispered. Her knees almost gave way. "Uncle Gideon." She ran to him. Caleb cut the ropes while Eliza held Gideon's face between her hands. He felt real, warm, frightened. "Alive." "You died," she said. "I let you believe I did." Her relief turned to hurt so quickly that Gideon lowered his eyes. "You watched me bury you." "I watched from a window across the street." Eliza stepped back. "Why?" "To keep you moving. You sent me into danger." "No," Gideon looked toward Caleb. "I sent you to the only man I believed would see what others missed." Caleb's jaw tightened. "You marked the music box with my father's initials. Charles made the hidden plate. Where is he?" Gideon's silence gave the answer before his words did. "He died 8 years ago." Caleb did not move. The ore shed seemed to shrink around him. "Where?" "New Mexico territory. Fever took him." "You were with him?" "Yes." Caleb looked down at the hammer in his hand. For 16 years, he had imagined bones beneath Bellweather. Then, for one night, he had allowed himself to imagine a living father somewhere beyond the desert. Now that hope was gone before it had fully formed. Did he ask about me? Gideon's eyes filled. Every day. Caleb turned away. Eliza watched his shoulders harden. She wanted to comfort him, but Gideon reached for her hand. There is no time. Who brought you here? Vale asked. The man with the scar. His name is Harlan Voss. Silas went still. My father employed a Harlan Voss. As an enforcer, Gideon said. He worked for the men behind Bellweather Recovery. What did they recover? Eliza asked. Silver that never appeared in company records. Gideon leaned back, gathering breath. Bellweather had a second vein beneath Tunnel 7, richer than anything listed in the books. A small group of investors smuggled the ore south and kept the money. When the supports began failing, Charles refused to approve them. Elena kept records of the injured. I copied the ledgers. And August Boone? Silas asked. Gideon looked at him sadly. Your father supplied the bad timber, but when he learned the company planned to seal workers inside Tunnel 7 to hide the illegal vein, he tried to stop them. Silas stared at him. My father helped save them. He tried. Did he succeed? Only partly. Gideon coughed again. Charles and I entered through a maintenance shaft. We brought out 6 men before the main collapse. The company found us before we could return for the others. Vale's voice was quiet. The town memorial lists 11 dead. 5 died, Gideon said. 6 survived. Caleb looked at him. Where are they? Scattered, hidden under new names. The company paid men to hunt them. Eliza felt cold. And my father. Gideon closed his eyes briefly. Your father was one of the 6. Her breath caught. Who? Before Gideon could answer, the mine bell rang above them. Not once. Repeatedly. Fast. Caleb looked toward the door. That is not a warning bell. Gideon's face filled with terror. It is the blasting signal. A heavy thud came from inside the mountain. Dust fell from the roof beams. Silas ran outside. Harlan is in the mine. Another thud followed. The horses pulled hard against their ropes. Gideon tried to rise and nearly collapsed. He took the red letters. Elena named every survivor in them. If he destroys Tunnel 7, he destroys the last proof. Caleb helped him stand. Where is the evidence? 14 paces from the entrance, 3rd wall brace. The numbers. 7-14-3. Vale looked toward the dark tunnel. He may have already set the charges. Gideon caught Caleb's sleeve. There is something else hidden there. What? A marriage record. Eliza stared at him. Gideon looked from her to Caleb. Elena was already married when she came to Bellweather. To whom? Eliza asked. The answer came from the mine entrance. A man stepped into the lantern light with a rifle across his arms. Harlan Voss. The pale scar marked his face from ear to jaw. To me, he said. No one moved. Eliza's face went white. Harlan smiled without warmth. Now you know who your father is. Silas reached slowly toward his revolver. Harlan lifted the rifle. Do not. He looked at Eliza. Your mother stole my child. Charles Rowan stole my silver, and Gideon Hart stole 16 years of my life. Eliza's voice shook. You burned the school. I searched it. You threatened Caleb. I warned him. You killed Anna Rowan. Caleb's head snapped toward Harlan. The scarred man's eyes shifted. That was enough. Caleb stepped forward. Harlan aimed the rifle at his chest. Careful, Blacksmith. Caleb stopped. For one terrible moment, the only sound was the bell rope striking wood above them. Then Gideon spoke. He is lying about one thing. Harlan's smile vanished. Gideon looked at Eliza. Your mother was never his wife. He reached inside his coat and pulled out a torn page wrapped in oilcloth. The marriage record was false. Harlan fired. The shot struck the lantern beside Gideon. Glass burst, flames spilled across the dirt. Vale pushed Eliza behind a timber post. Silas lunged toward Harlan. Caleb crossed the space between them and drove the rifle barrel upward before Harlan could fire again. The shot tore into the roof. Men struggled in smoke and darkness. Eliza heard Gideon calling her name. Then came a deep blast from inside Tunnel 7. The ground shook. A wall of dust rolled from the mine entrance. The wooden supports groaned. Caleb turned toward the tunnel just as part of the entrance collapsed between him and Eliza. Eliza. She reached through the dust. Caleb. Stone and timber crashed down. When the air cleared, they stood on opposite sides of a wall of broken rock. Harlan was gone. So was Gideon. And from somewhere deep inside the mine, beneath the cracking timbers, a man began ringing the collapse bell by hand. If this truth has changed who you trust, tell me in the comments what you believe Harlan is still hiding, because the next choice Caleb makes may cost him the one person he cannot bear to lose. Caleb struck the fallen timber with the head of his hammer. Once, twice. The sound came back dull and heavy. Eliza. Her answer came faintly through the rubble. I'm here. Caleb closed his eyes for 1 second. Only one. Are you hurt? My shoulder, I can move it. Vale. Alive. Sheriff Vale coughed somewhere behind her. Silas's voice came from Caleb's side of the collapse. I'm here too. Caleb turned. Silas stood near the damaged entrance, holding his left arm against his chest. His face was gray with dust, and the sleeve of his coat had torn at the shoulder. Harlan, Caleb asked. Gone deeper. Gideon. Silas looked toward the darkness beyond the rubble. He was beside Harlan when the blast came. The bell rang again. One slow iron note. Then another. Not from above the mine. From somewhere below them. Gideon had said the bell could warn of collapse, but no rope should have reached so deep into Tunnel 7. Caleb pressed his ear against a gap in the stones. Eliza, listen to me. Is there another passage behind you? A pause. Yes, a narrow one, it slopes down. Do not follow the bell. We may not have a choice. Vale's voice sounded weak but steady. The roof behind us is failing. A timber cracked on Eliza's side. Dust pushed through the gaps. Caleb looked around. The blast had damaged the main entrance, but a thin line of cold air brushed his cheek from the left wall. He lifted the lantern Silas had recovered and moved toward it. Behind a stack of broken ore carts, he found an opening no wider than his shoulders. The maintenance shaft, he said. Silas stared at it. The one Charles used. Caleb lowered himself to his knees. You cannot fit through there with that arm, Silas said. Then stay near the rubble and keep talking to her. Silas caught Caleb's coat before he entered. If Harlan is down there, he is armed. Caleb looked at the hammer in his hand. He has spent 16 years frightening people away from the truth. That does not make him harmless. No. Caleb's eyes moved to the wall separating him from Eliza. It makes him tired. He crawled into the shaft. The passage was tight and black. Sharp stone tore at his coat. The air smelled of damp earth and old timber. In places, he had to push the hammer ahead of him because there was no room to carry it at his side. He counted his breaths. At 14, he reached the first brace. At 23, the shaft bent downward. At 30, he found a rusted iron ring fixed to the wall. His father had made it. Caleb knew from the shape of the weld. A blacksmith's work carried habits like handwriting. Charles Rowan had always closed a ring with 2 angled strikes, leaving a faint ridge no wider than a thread. Caleb placed his fingers over it. For the first time in 16 years, he touched something his father had shaped after leaving him. A sound came through the darkness ahead. Someone sobbing. Caleb crawled faster. The shaft opened into a chamber behind Tunnel 7. Eliza sat against the wall with one hand gripping her injured shoulder. Vale stood near her, using a broken board as support. When Eliza saw Caleb, relief crossed her face so openly that it stopped him for half a breath. He went to her. She reached for him with her uninjured arm. Neither spoke. He touched his forehead to hers, both of them covered in dust, both listening to the mountain groan around them. "You came through the wall," she whispered. "I found another way." "You always do." A loud crack sounded above them. Vale pointed toward the lower passage. "We need to move." The bell rang once more. They followed it. The tunnel descended into colder air. Old rail tracks ran beneath their boots. On the wall, faded chalk marks listed names and dates. Eliza held the lantern close. "These are the missing workers." Caleb read 6 names. One had been crossed out. Harlan Voss. Another had been written beneath it. Samuel Hart. Eliza stopped. "Samuel was my mother's husband." Vale looked at her. Then Gideon lied again. "No," Caleb said. He examined the chalk. The name was added later. A voice came from the chamber ahead. "He lied about everything." Harlan stood beside the old collapse bell. Gideon knelt near the wall, his hands tied. A small box sat open at Harlan's feet, filled with letters, documents, and dark pieces of silver ore. "The missing proof." Harlan held a revolver against Gideon's neck. "You should have stayed at the forge," he told Caleb. "You should have stayed buried in whatever hole you crawled into." Harlan smiled. "You speak like Charles." Caleb moved slightly in front of Eliza. Harlan noticed. "She is not your sister." Eliza's face changed. Gideon lifted his head. "Do not listen to him." Harlan kicked the open box. A folded certificate slid across the stone. Eliza Hart was born 6 months after Samuel Hart died in the collapse. Eleanor used his name because it was safer than mine. Eliza looked at Gideon. "Is that true?" Gideon's silence answered. Harlan's voice softened, almost becoming human. "I loved your mother." "You hunted her," Eliza said. "She stole you from me." "She protected me from you." Harlan's eyes hardened. "She chose Charles Rowan. She chose Gideon. She chose every coward who told her I was dangerous." Caleb looked at the blasting wire near Harlan's boot. It ran toward the remaining support braces. He understood the actual danger. Harlan did not intend to escape. He intended to bring the mountain down over all of them. Caleb lowered his hammer. "You want the town to remember you as a victim." Harlan's attention shifted toward him. "You know nothing about me. I know you burned a school to find letters. I know you threatened a woman instead of facing the men who cheated you. And I know you have your heel on the trigger wire because you are afraid Gideon will speak." Harlan glanced down. Only for an instant. Caleb threw the hammer. It struck the bell. The iron note exploded through the chamber. Harlan fired at the sound. Vale pulled Eliza behind the wall. Gideon rolled aside. Caleb rushed forward and struck Harlan's wrist before he could aim again. The revolver fell, but Harlan's boot tightened around the blasting wire. The fuse sparked. A small flame began racing toward the final charge. Gideon looked at Caleb in terror. If that charge reaches the support, the whole chamber falls. The flame moved quickly through the darkness. Eliza saw where the wire passed beneath the old rail. She pulled free from Vale and ran toward it. "Eliza, no." She dropped to her knees and seized the burning line with her bare hand. The flame died inside her fist. For 1 second, no one moved. Then Harlan drew a knife from his coat and turned toward her. Caleb stepped between them. Behind Harlan, the old support gave a long, breaking groan, and the floor beneath Tunnel 7 began to sink. The stone floor dropped beneath Harlan's boots. He reached for Eliza, but Caleb caught the front of his coat and pulled him back from her. The movement dragged all three of them toward the sinking edge. A crack split across the chamber. Old rails bent. The box of letters slid into the widening gap. Gideon threw himself forward and caught it by the handle. "Move," Sheriff Vale shouted. The support above them broke. Silas appeared through the lower passage just as a timber crashed between him and the chamber. He struck it aside with his good shoulder and reached for Eliza. Caleb pushed her toward him. "Take her." Eliza seized Caleb's sleeve. "Not without you." Harlan twisted free and grabbed the fallen revolver. The weapon was half buried beneath dust. He raised it, but the ground shifted again. His foot slipped over the edge. Caleb caught his wrist. For one moment, Harlan hung above the black opening, held by the man he had threatened, hunted, and tried to bury. Harlan looked up. "You would save me." Caleb's burned and bloodied hand tightened around him. "You are still a man." Something changed in Harlan's face. Not gratitude. Shame. The revolver fell from his other hand and vanished into the darkness below. Then the cloth of his coat tore. Caleb grabbed for him again, but Harlan pulled away. "Tell her," he said. Eliza stepped closer. "Tell me what?" Harlan looked at her for the last time. "I was never your father." Gideon closed his eyes. Harlan continued, his voice nearly lost beneath the breaking stone. "I wanted Alina to believe I was. I changed the record. Samuel Hart was your father." Eliza's breath caught. Harlan gave a bitter smile. "She chose a good man. I could not forgive her for that." The ledge beneath him broke. He disappeared into the dark as the tunnel collapsed. Caleb stood frozen for one heartbeat. Then Silas pulled him back. They ran. Vale supported Gideon. Silas kept one arm around Eliza while Caleb followed with the box of evidence pressed against his chest. Behind them, Tunnel 7 folded inward with a roar that chased them through the passage. The maintenance shaft was too narrow for Gideon. "There is another exit," he said. "Charles found it years ago." He pointed toward a low tunnel marked with a faded iron ring. Caleb recognized his father's work again. They followed the rings through the mountain. One after another, Charles Rowan's small welds showed them the way. Marks left by a father who had once escaped the same darkness and had unknowingly built a path for his son. The final opening was blocked by rotted boards. Caleb raised his shoulder and drove through them. Cold dawn air rushed over his face. They stumbled out onto the northern slope of Bellweather as the ground shook behind them. A cloud of dust rose from the old mine entrance, but the mountain held. For a long time, no one spoke. Eliza sat on a flat stone while Caleb wrapped her burned palm with a strip torn from his shirt. His own hands trembled, though he tried to hide it. She watched him tie the cloth. "You caught him." He was falling. After everything he did. Caleb lowered his eyes. "I did not want him to decide what kind of man I became." Eliza placed her uninjured hand over his. "You are nothing like him." The words reached somewhere deep in him. Nearby, Gideon opened the box of evidence. The letters were damaged but readable. The ledgers remained intact. Inside a smaller envelope was the true marriage record of Alina and Samuel Hart. Eliza read her father's name silently. Samuel had been one of the miners Charles and Gideon rescued. He died weeks later from injuries he suffered during the collapse, but not before he made Charles promise to protect Alina and their unborn child. Charles had agreed to let the company believe Eliza was his daughter. It had been a false trail. A dangerous man had followed it for 16 years. Caleb read the final letter from his father. "Son," There may come a day when you learn I lived beyond Bellweather. If that day comes, know I stayed away because men watched the road to Red Mesa. I believed distance would keep you safe. I do not know whether I was brave or only afraid, but I thought of you every morning I woke and every night I closed my eyes. Do not spend your life hiding love because fear calls itself protection. I made that mistake for both of us. Caleb folded the letter slowly. Eliza sat beside him. He knew you would understand. No, Caleb said. He looked at her. He hoped I would do better. 3 months later, the territorial court reopened the Bellweather case. The ledgers cleared the names of Charles Rowan, Gideon Hart, Eliza Hart, and the surviving miners. August Boone's role was made public, but so was his final effort to stop the company. Silas sold part of the Double Star Ranch and used the money to support the families harmed by Bellweather. Sheriff Vale resigned his badge. Then the town asked him to take it back. This time, he accepted only after reading every hidden record aloud in the chapel. Gideon remained in Red Mesa. Eliza did not forgive him quickly, but she allowed him to earn his place beside her one honest day at a time. The schoolhouse was rebuilt before spring. Caleb made every hinge, every stove bracket, and every desk frame himself. The townspeople worked beside him. For the first time, they saw what his labor cost. On the first morning of class, Eliza found a small iron bird resting on her desk. Its wings were open. Beneath it was a narrow band of polished metal. Caleb stood in the doorway, holding his hat in both hands. I spent years believing the forge was all I could offer. Eliza touched the little bird. It is not. No. He stepped closer. But it is where I learned that broken things can become strong again. He opened his palm. A simple ring lay there, shaped by fire and careful hands. Eliza Hart, I will not choose your future for you. I will only ask whether you might choose one with me. Her eyes filled. Outside, children laughed near the new school steps. A horse shifted beside the fence. Morning light moved across the clean windows. Eliza placed her hand in his. I chose it before you knew how to ask. They married beneath the rebuilt chapel bell. Silas stood beside Caleb. Gideon walked Eliza down the aisle. Mrs. Talbot cried openly and denied it afterward. Years later, people still told the story of Bellweather Mine, but they no longer spoke first of hidden silver or fallen tunnels. They spoke of a blacksmith who reached for an enemy because mercy mattered more than anger. They spoke of a woman who crossed the frontier for the truth and found a home beside a forge. And above Caleb's workbench, beside his father's final letter, rested the iron bird with open wings. The town had once believed heroes arrived on horseback. In the end, Red Mesa learned that some heroes stayed in one place, kept the fire burning, and repaired what everyone else had abandoned. If this story reminded you that love can survive fear, silence, and even the oldest lies, share it with someone who still believes broken hearts can heal. Because the strongest things are not born without scars. They are shaped by them.